Okay, as promised, here is my tutorial for Dwarf Fortress 2015 Adventure Mode. We're going to start with the very basics on where to acquire Dwarf Fortress, the newest version. There's going to be a link in the description for a starter pack, which will include several utilities which are going to be both useful in Fortress and Adventure Mode. Like I said, I'm going to be focusing more on Adventure Mode here, so be wary of that. I'm using a tile set called Phoebus. I am a casual, so I use a tile set because I like graphics. If you've played Dwarf Fortress already in ASCII, that's fine, but just be wary that I'm going to be using a tile set. So we're going to start by creating a new world. Okay, so let's go on to world generation. Now, there are several factors that affect how interesting your world is going to be for Adventure Mode. The first one you're going to see is world size. So let me show you what a pocket world looks like. So the pocket world is the smallest world that is possible to create in Dwarf Fortress, and it is really tiny. And by really tiny, I mean a dwarf, or any adventurer I should say, can probably cross this in a couple days at best. So I'm not really a fan of pocket worlds at all, just because they're really tiny. There's not a lot of things that are really interesting that go on in them. And they usually all follow this kind of same pattern where it's just a small little island, or like one massive continent, right? I mean, if this was a world, it would just be one massive continent, so that's kind of boring. Smaller is a little bit more interesting. Again, it's just one continent though, so not really interesting. Now you can see here that there's actually some sort of islands, but in Adventure Mode you won't be able to access those too much. I'm gonna actually put history to very short just for the heck of it for right now, just to show you what worlds look like. So on the other side of the spectrum there's large, which are huge. You can see that this would actually take you quite some time to travel across, but there's also going to be more monsters, more cities, higher population usually. Personally, and then medium of course is just going to be, medium is manageable, but I personally prefer small worlds because there's still some interesting stuff that can occur here. Now you can see this isn't all just one, well technically again it is all one continent, but there's some lakes, there's rivers that form, so it's a lot more interesting than smaller or pocket worlds. So personally I prefer small. Now for history you want to keep this at short or medium for your first game. Very short is only 5 years. Now the reason that's bad is because history will determine how much population your world has in terms of both like dwarves, humans, and elves, and goblins, as well as monsters, as well as cities and towns too. So typically short is a pretty good estimate. 125 years will give you a good amount of population, good amount of civilization, good amount of cities and different sites you can visit, as well as a good amount of monsters to slay. The other thing you want to be kind of wary of is history will pre-generate events such as wars, historical figures, killing monsters or slaying dragons and things like that. And all of these things will become statues when you play Fortress Mode. Your dwarves will create tributes to these events. So if you want a world that will still have a lot of your adventurers' actions be a part of its history, you can actually gen a world with short history, and then in the middle of generation you just hit escape. And this will cut the year generation off. For example, I just cut it off at year 51. Or year 31, sorry, so you can actually stop it halfway through. Number of civilizations is the amount of different types of races and cultures there are going to be. I'm just reading the menu here. But this is also the amount of like different races, I should say. For example, if you keep it on very high or high, you're going to get several amounts of dwarven civilizations, several amounts of elven civilizations. So it's not, so even if you put it on very low, there's still going to be one of every race, one civilization of every race. But if you want there to be a lot, which you probably do in Fortress or in Adventure Mode, high and very high are really good. So let's just review real quick. You're going to want a small size world, a short history, and high civilization. Number of sites is the amount of cities, hamlets, elven fortresses, dwarven fortresses, all those types of things. So again, you want that on high or very high, just so you have a lot of places to visit. Now, number of beasts is how many large beasts there are going to be. So this includes monsters, dragons, colossi, rocks, things like that. So if you want to have fun in adventure mode, the dwarven concept of fun is essentially how difficult or annoying this game is going to be, or how much you're going to die. You can set that on high or very high. Now if this is your first adventure, you can just set that on high. That isn't too difficult. And it's not like you'll just run into monsters in town, and since you usually spawn in town, you should be fine. Now, opposed to number of beasts, there's natural savagery. Savagery is how difficult the world is to settle. So if you have it on very high savagery, the wild animals will be like lions, bears, sharks, and things like that. But if you, on the other side, if you have it on low or very low, you'll run into bunnies and owls and foxes and things like that. So just to make the road safer, you should put this on low natural savagery. You'll still have a lot of monsters to fight, but the kind of trash mobs you run into will be like rabbits instead of bears that can kill you. Now, mineral occurrence affects two things. The first thing is in Fortress mode, how easy it is to get metal, so I usually keep it on frequent. But I never put it on everywhere because then it's not really special to run into metal. In adventure mode, the amount of minerals will determine what civilizations have access to what metals. So typically humans, for example, will usually only mine very low into the surface, so they'll have like bronze and iron sometimes, and copper, while obviously dwarves will have steel and iron and silver and stuff like that. So if you put it on frequent, you might have a better chance of humans finding iron, so I usually keep this on frequent. Never put it on rare or very rare unless you want to give yourself a challenge in the world. So again, just to overview, you want a small world size, a short history, high civilization, high number of sites, high number of beasts, low savagery, and frequent mineral occurrence. And then once you're ready to generate your world, you just hit Y and it'll create your world for you. Now, I'm actually going to gen a very specific world for myself to play on, so I'm going to let this game run. My world will probably be a little bit different than yours. It'll actually be very different, but a lot of the mechanics will be the same. So the next thing I'm going to cover is character creation, and I'll catch you next time.